Okay, so just a little review from last time. We talked about the beginning of this sort of second part of the Heart Sutra, where we start talking about the Bodhisattva path. And we talked about the Bodhisattva, seeing with the Dharma eye, which is one of the five eyes of practice. And this Dharma eye, true Dharma eye, is the eye that sees individuality with the eye of wisdom, or with the wisdom and compassion of the Bodhisattva. So the Bodhisattva doesn't stay in samsara because of wisdom, and he or she doesn't stay in nirvana because out of compassion. So this Dharma eye is the eye that sees individuality in order to make an offering to all beings. But the eye doesn't believe in this individuality, so to speak. We don't get caught in the individuality. So that goes in hand with living by vow. Basically, that's the Bodhisattva vow. Here, living fearlessly in vow. So we see individuality through the eye of wisdom. And we talked about taking refuge in Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, and we'll talk a little bit about that too today. That's what the Bodhisattva does, is this relying on Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, the sutra entrance mentions, is actually taking refuge. So first, I'd just like to say that kind of doing some investigation about these last few lines of the Heart Sutra, it became clear that there's with all sutras probably, but especially these Mahayana sutras, it can be interpreted many different ways, and there seems to be some controversy among some scholars about how it really should be translated in English. Just let Oidi in there. So anyway, these last few lines, I think the other issue is that I can't read the original Sanskrit or ancient Chinese. So I think it's okay though, really, because we have to read several commentaries on these sutras in order to get some idea of the wisdom that others have gleaned from them. But that being said too, I think the main source of understanding or wisdom, hopefully, is our practice. So I just wanted to give some kind of caveat here that these last few words of the sutra can be sort of interpreted different ways, and I hope to give like a couple of different ways that they can be interpreted. So anyway, this next line that we'll talk about is the far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. So that's the part we're at in the Sanskrit. So this is going back to again the basic teaching of the Buddha, because the Buddha said that the difficulty of the cause of our suffering is that we hold on to wrong views. And the main view that is the problem is the view that we are an independent self, and that things, have an independent existence. So, traditionally there are four wrong views. The actual Sanskrit here in the Heart Sutra is something like inverted view or upside down view or corrupted. Sometimes it's translated as perverted view. So the main upside down view is that we're the center of the universe. that we think that our world is reality, that, things that become objects of our world, like we're the subject and the world, around us is the object. That is the primary inverted view. But traditionally there are four, basic wrong views. And the first one is to view that what is painful as something pleasurable. So, we indulge in certain things that in the moment give us pleasure, but overall they are a source of suffering and samsara. We can all relate to this. We see things that are as permanent that are actually impermanent. So that means anything, of course. The self is the classic example, or we, try to get things and we think we can keep them and they will make us happy. And in fact, everything is always changing. So that is also just part of samsara. And then to see what is unwholesome as wholesome. This goes along with the rest of these. And then the fourth one is, having an independent self, or to see self in things that don't have self. So to see, these are all, kind of intertwined here, of course. Everything's impermanent and always changing and conditioned by other things, and that's why things don't have a permanent independent self, including us. Most of all us. So, these four wrong views are, the remedy for them is wisdom. Or, practice alleviating. This is the basic teaching of the Buddha. So, so the interesting part here too about this is that, if we relate it back to the Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sūtra, where, as just a reminder, where the Buddha says, when we see the arising of things, we don't get stuck in nihilism or impermanence. We don't thinking that is the nature of existence. And when we see the passing away of things, we don't get stuck in eternalism or, seeing things as permanent or real. So that he called that the middle way, or he also called it right view in that sutta. So this right view is actually not a view at all, it's a practice. And that right view, I think, is, Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, it is wisdom. But it's not something that we gain or something that we intellectually process things with. It's a practice. So, but this goes all the way back to that early sutta, that Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sūtra. So it's a right view is the beyond view. Alleviating inverted views is to go beyond view. It's not replacing it with another view. It's actually, beyond view and not view. So this kind of, on to the next part, the realizing nirvana part is kind of, problematic in a certain way, given what the sutra has said up to this part, that nirvana doesn't exist and that bodhisattvas, go beyond nirvana and samsara. So I think there's a couple of ways that we could think of it. And one is that possibly the sutta here is talking about this nirvana of the bodhisattva. So we talked about this on the second or third time meeting, I think, about these. In Mahayana Buddhism, there are actually three kinds of nirvana. Early Buddhism talked about two kinds. There's the nirvana with remainder, in which the person, the Buddha or an arhat, achieves, cleanses themselves completely of the defilements, and so, but they still have some remainder of defilement of being alive in the Five Skandhas is that just the fact that they have the Five Skandhas, there is a remainder, sort of residual, part that's not nirvana. And then when that person, passes away, they go into complete nirvana, without remainder. That's called nirvana without remainder, because there's no more Five Skandhas. That it's completely blown out, cessation. But later, Mahayana Buddhism started talking about the nirvana of the bodhisattva. This is the nirvana of no dwelling or no abiding. So, as I just said a moment ago, bodhisattvas don't dwell in samsara because of wisdom, and they don't dwell in this nirvana in this, traditional way because of compassion. So, in other words, it's really saying it was beyond nirvana and samsara. So, this is the Dharma eye. We see with the Dharma eye, we allow the kind of mistake of seeing individualities, because we need that in order to give the medicine of compassion to ourselves and other beings. So, the bodhisattva is kind of dancing or surfing between nirvana and samsara, or the bodhisattva goes beyond concepts of both. So it could be that that's what this nirvana is, that the sutta is referring to, the no abiding or no dwelling. One part of that too, about this nirvana of no dwelling, is that nirvana is realized through operating the ferry, the ferry between this shore of samsara and the other shore of nirvana. The bodhisattva is said to be the ferry person, the ferryman or the ferry person who operates the boat, the vehicle for others to realize nirvana. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but actually that practice of ferrying is nirvana, is the expression of nirvana in Mahayana Buddhism. So realizing nirvana itself would be ferrying others across this river that is no river, and teaching, ferrying others across the river would be teaching them that there is no river. So going beyond, the teaching of samsara and nirvana is the teaching of nirvana, or, this nirvana of no abiding. So it's this kind of strange or unusual logic that we find in the Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sūtras. So there is a river, but there's not a river. Therefore, there is a river. That kind of logic. So go beyond river and not river. But this same part, Red Pine, in his book, gives a kind of interesting explanation of this, and he sees, because of the syntax of the Sanskrit, the version that he's using, he says that he can see that the nirvana is actually something that's seeing through. The bodhisattva sees through delusions and sees through nirvana. So, in the way that he translates it, he says, they see through delusions and finally nirvana. So they see through delusions and finally see through nirvana. So the dichotomy between nirvana and samsara. So that's another way that we could interpret this. This sort of difficulty that comes up in this part of the sutra. But the next line is, all Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. So, again, here the word rely is take refuge, as I was talking about last time. So Buddhas become Buddhas by taking refuge in Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. So, I looked up this word, this Sanskrit word, and it has this word that's used in the sutra, taking refuge. So it can mean, taking asylum, but it also can mean employing or practicing. So it has both of those meanings. And so again, here I think it's, of course, this taking refuge is practice itself, or it's Zen or Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. We've said this through the whole time that we've been meeting, that Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is not something that we see intellectually or we use as a tool. It is practice itself. It is our Zen practice. That is the grounding, of what Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is. Because when we sit in Zen, we just let go of our concept of samsara, nirvana, delusion, enlightenment. All of those dichotomies, that Nagarjuna said, are just conventional designations. We let go, and Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is there. So that's what we do in our Zen, and that is kind of the perfect, so to speak, expression. In Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, there's no perfect, and there's no perfection, no defilement. So anything we say is wrong, but it's kind of the most basic or pure time from a certain perspective that we can express this Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, because we don't have to discriminate, we don't have to make a mistake to in our normal way of thinking of it. But actually, we can think of our Zen as an offering, as compassion to. And anything we say about our Zen is also a mistake in some way, too. So any approach we take to it, or any kind of boxing it in or saying what it is also a mistake. But we go ahead and say it because we've taken the Bodhisattva vow and we're willing to make a mistake out of compassion. And then it's not a mistake, then it's practice. So anyway, so coming back to taking refuge in Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, we need a kind of faith to do that. We need a kind of faith to let go, and we have the faith that when we let go, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is manifest. So it seems that the Heart Sutra is saying that Buddhas just have perfect faith. They realize their faith in practice through practicing. So they realize their practice faith. They're expressing it. So that is really the teaching too, that the most basic and again, using these words are difficult, but the most essential expression of faith is practice, or the most pure, or the most fundamental is practice. So but we as human beings, we're not Buddhas, and we need some kind of motivation or some kind of intellectual understanding, or we need to have our tiny little human views placated a little bit. So that's why we do things like, have a meeting like this and talk about Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. And so, as Sawaki Roshi said, all sutras, Buddhist sutras, footnotes to Zen, basically, because that is sort of the perfect expression of Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. But when we study these sutras with, the heart and mind of Zazen, it is an expression of our Zazen, and it is practice. Last fall, I attended a virtual Genzo-e with my teacher, and we studied Buddha Sutras, the Shibo Genzo chapter, and that's where, Dogen Zenji said basically the whole work is expounding the sutra. He talks about this in many different ways, but everything, the whole Prajnaparamita, the whole Zenki, or the whole universe is an expounding of the sutra. So he didn't like this idea that we study sutra in order to understand something else, but the study itself is an expression, and also, there's no difference between the expression of truth and the truth itself, and the practice of expressing it. So, but we look at it because of these different ways, because of we're living beings. We need to take a kind of a view in order to let go of our views. So this part reminded me of the part in Shibo Genzo, the first chapter of Shibo Genzo, Genjo Koan, where Dogen Zenji says, when Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they don't need to perceive that they are Buddhas. However, they are enlightened Buddhas, and they continue actualizing Buddha. So I think this actualizing Buddha here, one of the meanings of that is the actualization of this, absolute Buddha that we talked about last time, I think, the time before, these absolute three treasures where Buddha is seen as the unity of the universe, and the Dharma is the truth, of the universe, or the actual practice of the universe. And the Sangha is all beings, kind of the collective view of everything in the universe as Sangha, but so through practicing individually, we express unity. We express the absolute through this body and mind. Through this limited person, we express the unlimited reality. So this is a kind of a statement here, I think. Buddhas of all times rely on Prajnaparamita, another expression of the interdependence between our practice, the person practicing, and the reality that we're awakening to. All of those things are Prajnaparamita, the interdependence of all of those things. But again, we take a view and we say there are Buddhas in order to, alleviate suffering. But really, these things are all expressions of each other. So, this non-dual relationship between Buddhas and the reality that they understand or express is a reason it's said that, Prajnaparamita is the mother of Buddhas, of all Buddhas, or the womb of Buddhas. So that's another way of expressing this reality. And, as I was saying earlier, it's related to this paramita in the Chinese translation or commentary. The paramita itself means crossing over. The Chinese masters interpreted this paramita as the act of going from one shore of samsara to the other shore of nirvana. So that means, as I've been saying here, there's no difference between the wisdom of we do and that reality of, samsara and nirvana, that's all one. When we practice as a bodhisattva, that is expressed as Prajñāpāramita. So that means, I think what makes a Buddha is their practice in the moment. They express this reality. So there's no difference between a Buddha and their practice and the reality that they awaken to, this Prajñāpāramita. So this relying on Prajñāpāramita is what makes them a Buddha. So if that were the case, there would be some way that you could attain Buddhahood, or that you could attain Prajñāpāramita. There would be some way you could possess it. That you could get something, but there's of course nothing to gain. There's no thing to possess, and no person, to possess in the life of Prajñāpāramita. So, the example I like to refer to is, of course, the Shakyamuni Buddha kept sitting zazen. Every time he gave a Dharma talk, he sat zazen almost before that. Apparently he sat zazen every morning in the monastery. Later, when he had a monastery with the monks, and he kept teaching the Eightfold Path, and he kept following that Eightfold Path himself, So if enlightenment were something that you could get, there would be no reason for him to do that. I mean, it's the same thing as, Nagarjuna, the classic statement is, I don't know if it's actually in the middle verses, but the classic example is, running and a runner can't be separated. So what makes a runner, a runner is the act of running. So we intellectually we say, oh, well, there's a runner without running, but that's just a concept. But so Buddhas are Buddhas when they do Buddha, and they're always doing Buddha apparently. So I think that's what's being said here when we say Buddhas rely on Prajñāpāramita. So the next line is, and they thereby attain unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment. So again, this seems kind of problematic. Buddhas attain complete, perfect enlightenment given all of the things that the sutras just said before this. So especially the word thereby, to me, it sounds like this relying is a means to attain enlightenment. So it's some kind of a vehicle, to get enlightenment. But as we just said, your Prajñāpāramita is enlightenment itself. So there's no way to get it from this perspective, from this understanding. So Red Pine, he doesn't have the word thereby there. In his translation, he says Buddhas realize unexcelled, perfect enlightenment. And the word that he says to translate it as realize, it means something like reach complete awareness or express complete awareness. But the awareness, is not of something. In our zazen, we can say we're aware to some degree, from a certain perspective, but we're not aware in the way that we normally are because we're not aware of something. the subject-object relationship is what makes awareness usually possible. So, we have to be aware of something, but there's no object in our Zen, and there's no object in Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. There's no difference between the subject and the object. So, again, though, as a bodhisattva in our bodhisattva practice, we allow this mistake of being aware of the suffering of other sentient beings, and that is compassion. So we allow that subject-object relationship to enter again, knowing it's an illusion. So this is seeing what's non-seeing, going beyond seeing, beyond awareness. And so Rinpoche he totally does away with the word attain. Attain, of course, it kind of implies that there's something to get or some stage that's been reached. But another possibility might be is that, as I was saying before, the knowledge that is attained is that there's nothing to attain. So that's another possibility. So what understanding we increase, any understanding that we get is the understanding that there's nothing to get. So it's going beyond attainment, and non-attainment. So this is the kind of, again, sort of strange logic of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, but it's the same, it's the same kind of thing as the Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sūtra. It's practice, what we attain or what we express is practice that no attainment or beyond attainment and non-attainment is practice. So it could be that, it could be this attainment is the knowledge or understanding or practice that there's no attainment. That's another possibility too. But it's definitely a different attainment than we would normally think of. So the next part goes on to say, therefore know the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya as the great miraculous mantra. So in some translations, you actually see a word like magic, or this is the great magic mantra, or the great spell, or some kind of incantation. And I think that is probably due to the fact that this comes from a time in ancient history when people, they didn't differentiate science and religion, or science and magic, and there was a lot more mystery to the world. You had unseen beings. Even Buddhism, of course, recognizes different unseen realms where there are beings that have influence that we don't see with the normal eye, that we can see with the divine eye, the second eye. But still, those were not seen as, they were still samsara. In Buddhism, they still are seen as samsara. It's not like those are superior realms, really, as far as awakening goes. But so it could be, I think the original was something like that. It's just, this was a time when, transformation or affecting a change in one's life was all tied up with, a kind of magic that was seen to be as a science, kind of a science that we would think of as science today. But, today, of course, we separate the two very clearly. I think usually most, so maybe, I don't know, that's up for debate maybe, but anyway, what I think the sutra is referring to here is the power of vow. You know, it's attesting to the power of vow, and this shift that I talked about last time when we started living by vow as a bodhisattva rather than living according to our own self-centered desires. It's a miraculous shift. Nothing has actually happened, but our entire world is changed. So there's nothing attained, nothing is different really, but from another perspective, everything is transformed. So this word, mantra, apparently, after looking around a bit, it seems there's no really universally agreed upon definition of what a mantra is. But in Buddhism, the tradition is that I think early mantras were thought of as a kind of, let's see, Rinpoche says that he makes a difference between a dharani and a mantra. And, dharani, he said, has more kind of a philosophical or teaching or a meaning behind it. And he said a mantra was just words meant to somehow affect the universe. So I think this comes from the Vedic tradition. Apparently the Vedas, this ancient Vedic tradition that the Buddha was in the midst of when the Vedas are sort of a collection of mantras or sayings that were imploring the gods in order to affect human life, like imploring the gods to make favorable changes for human beings. And the Buddha really didn't like that kind of idea. He thought it was meaningless, in the end, to just pray to the gods for something that he wanted. He thought that didn't have anything to do with spiritual awakening. So he criticized the Brahmins a lot in the sutras, because the Brahmins at that time, apparently, you were born a Brahmin. It was a case that was, a caste. You couldn't. The Buddha said that what makes you a Brahmin is how you behave and your attitude to your spiritual life, and that nobody can be like a superior being just because of the way they're born. And so, the Brahmins could do all of these rituals that nobody was allowed to do. And they were the ones who were wealthy. And this is very simplified, and I have a very elementary understanding of this. So if you're interested in this period of history, investigate and let me know if I'm saying something incorrect. But apparently this was the kind of overall attitude that the Buddha, didn't like, was the idea that something unseen could be implored to benefit our spiritual awakening, like something that was kind of theoretical or only a few select people could see or connect with. That's what he didn't like. So apparently there were some mantras and there are actually parts of the Pali Canon that are considered, mantras or verses that, but they're, it's not for some kind of worldly gain that, any of these supposedly were set up for. But anyway, in Mahayana Buddhism, a mantra, from my understanding, or a mantra, dharani, they're kind of overlap apparently. there was some kind of idea, that there were certain sounds that would affect the kind of foundation of the universe. So if you made, a certain sound, you could bring about some kind of change in the universe through whether it be through the gods or, I think, Buddhism is not considered through the gods. That's more of a Vedic kind of attitude. But there was, cross-fertilization between the Vedic tradition of Buddhism and Hindu, which, the Vedic tradition later gave rise to, Hindu, what people call Hinduism. But anyway, it was thought that the sounds themselves were important, not the meaning in a mantra or a dharani. That it was not the meaning, but the sound somehow affected the universe in a way. And it's kind of an interesting thing here, Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya as a mantra. So, at Soto Zen, there's a lot of chanting involved actually in the traditional way of practicing it. And there's a lot of ritual. The time that I spent in Japan, there were a lot of rituals and a lot of chanting and stuff that none of us really understood. Some of the things that we did were kind of mixed in with the indigenous culture, like stuff that, like Shintoism, that we didn't really have a deep understanding of. And anyway, in this lineage, Uchama Roshi and Sawaki Roshi's lineage, there was really kind of a resistance to that. Uchama Roshi, especially, openly talked about and criticized, like Soto Zen monks who did funerals for people and chanted for them for money, and then like the more money you had, the better funeral you get, the better chanting you would get. And, if you just were a poor family, you would just get a shorter one. And these people, his criticism at the time was that nobody was really doing Zazen. They were just doing chanting. They were just chanting for money. It was a business. And in Taiji, when Uchama Roshi took over, as far as I know, they've never done any ceremony there. They've never done any kind of chanting. And this is largely, I think, due to this resistance, of the commodifying, of doing chanting. But of course, we're in a different time and a different culture, and the medicine that we need might be different. And actually, my teacher at his temple does chant the Heart Sutra and the Daijin Dharani in the morning, which is a pretty minimal service, but it was more than I expected to do when I first showed up there. I thought we probably wouldn't do anything, right? But he's adapted to what he felt like is meaningful in this culture, and it's really about, Uchama Roshi said that anything can be a toy or anything really can be an expression of awakening, almost anything. So it's really about our relationship to the chanting and to the ceremonies that are done. So this particular lineage that I'm in, we're kind of known for not doing much ceremony, and we don't do any right now at Gyobutsuji. I'm not even doing morning service anymore, but we could start doing that, again. In fact, Uchama Roshi had this practice of chanting. That's Monty commenting over there. You can hear that. Monty? Sorry. He had this practice of taking refuge. It's called Nembutsu, and usually this is a Pure Land Buddhist practice. But he did invoking Avalokiteshvara, so he would when he was in some situation where he wanted to come back to, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, or when he really wanted to, come back to his vow, he would say, I take refuge in Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva over and over again, or Namukie Kanzen Bosatsu in Japanese. And so especially when he got older, apparently he wasn't able to sit, and he put more and more of his emphasis in this kind of practice. And he said that at some point, doing Nembutsu was doing Zazen with the mouth, and doing Zazen was doing Nembutsu with the body. So it's really about our relationship to chanting. And actually, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is something to be practiced, as I said. So chanting a mantra, chanting the sutra as a mantra is really quite appropriate. It's a way to, if we approach it as practice, it's a way to open the hand of thought, as Uchama Roshi said. So he felt like it was exactly the same thing when we chant with all of our heart and all of our mind in the here and now, that we cut through, delusions about past and present delusion and enlightenment, and we express just the present moment, here and now. So I think this is the spirit of really, chanting a mantra in the light of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. And there was a quote out of this book that I liked a lot, the Red Pine book, where he quotes David Kingsley, an author of a book about the Heart Sutra, and he says, it's not that the mantra belongs to the goddess. He's talking about the goddess Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, which, in Mahayana Buddhism, sometimes she's embodied, as the mother of Buddha's Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. So this is symbolized by a woman. So it's not that the mantra belongs to the goddess, which is the way one is often tempted to understand the relationship between the deity and the mantra. So, in some kind of esoteric traditions, it's the mantra is something that you do in order to connect with the god or the goddess. But he says, it's not that it belongs to the goddess, but the situation rather is that the mantra is the goddess. And then Red Pine has his commentary here. In this case, I would say that the mantra is not the goddess, but her womb. So Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, it's a metaphorical way, of course, of saying that practice gives rise to Buddha. And that's actually the name of Gyobutsuji. It's based on this idea, or, Dogen Zenji called one of the Buddhas in, chapter of Shobogenzo, he called that Buddha practice. And anyway, I won't talk about that, but that's what Gyobutsuji is named after, is, practice Buddha. So, it's kind of another way we can approach practice of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya itself, because, as I said, since we're not gaining anything, we're expressing something. We're expressing, Buddha. And so some people find this a kind of devotional entryway into the Dharma. And it's a way that we can talk about it, really, our practice as a way to honor Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya or express or make an offering. Back when I was practicing in the San Francisco Zen Center lineage, we did this hymn every day that was called Hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom. And I couldn't find, I think it's Chinese origin, but and it's just a short chant that we would do, or the or the person who announced the chant would say this every time: homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy. The perfection of wisdom gives life. Unstaining the entire world cannot stain her. She is a source of light, and from everyone in the triple world she removes darkness. Most excellent are her works. She brings light that so all fear and distress may be forsaken, and disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She herself is an organ of vision, and she has a clear knowledge of the own being of all dharmas, for she does not stray away from it. The perfection of wisdom of the Buddha sets in motion the wheel of Dharma. So, I think this is a way, that we can interpret this part of the Heart Sutra, and it's a way that we can approach our Zazen actually too. We're sitting down and making an offering of, of our body and mind to all beings, to Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. Jared just said he has to leave. He has to go to work, just so everybody knows. Okay, I better keep going. It's almost time to stop. So the next part is that this is the great bright mantra, the supreme mantra, the incomparable mantra, which removes all suffering and is true, not false. So in this part, I think bright refers to eliminating, the sense that our delusions and disappear in the light of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, or in our Zazen. The difference between self and others, samsara and nirvana, all of these dichotomies, when we practice and open the hand of thought, they disappear. And Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is incomparable. It can't be compared to anything else because it includes everything. You can't compare eternity to time, so it's beyond comparison because it includes everything. And this title, supreme, the supreme mantra. This is a title. It's actually a title of Buddha. It's like one of the epithets of Buddha's. So it's again going back to the idea that there's no difference between Buddha and Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. So, and just to be sure, if we state here that it removes all suffering, the basic underlying original teaching of the Buddha, we're just returning to what all Buddhists teach in the end of suffering. So, our suffering really arises through making comparisons. By comparing this moment to the last moment or last week, or next, or comparing it to the future, or worrying about the future, or comparing our pain to not having pain. I'm not saying we don't have pain, but what really suffering really comes in is that we want it to be something different on a very deep level, or we think that it's somehow wrong. But anyway, all these dichotomies are pieces of the mind. The suffering really arises because of our dichotomies between self, other, past, future, so forth, samsara, nirvana, Buddha, sentient beings. Therefore, we proclaim the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya mantra, the mantra that says Gate, Gate, Parasamgate, Parasamgate, Bodhisattva. So this is a famous mantra that is usually just left in its original Sanskrit because it's it's a mantra. You don't change the sounds, usually. So, of course, it's the literal meaning is usually translated as, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely, beyond. So this is a really interesting word, and it's part of the word tathagata, the one thus gone, the one gone to thusness. So I think we could also say before, in Ujjayi Roshi's teaching, he talked about the reality before we cook it with our thinking. Before we fry it up and make it edible and make it part of our human sentiment. So it's like, metaphorically, the difference between a live swimming fish in the ocean and one cooked up in the frying pan before us. So it's not a simple thing because we need the nourishment of something cooked, but it's different from the vivid, reality before we cook it up. It's not, it's not the same thing. So this reality before we separate into subject, object, and preferable or unpreferable, and then we hear this called like our original faith before we were born, or the time before the empty kalpa. These kinds of words. That's what we're talking about here, I think. So, just to finish up here, there's the commentary that was quoted by Red Pine and by Fa Song, this Chinese master, and I wanted to just read it because I think it's a good summation of this part of the sutra of what we've been talking about. He said, if we insist on explanation, gate means gone, to ferry across, which is the effect of deep wisdom. The repetition of gate means to ferry oneself and also ferry others. So paragate means the other shore, which is the place one is ferried to. And the sa in parasangate means together, everyone ferried across together. So Bodhi tells us what kind of other shore. So Bodhi tells us what kind of other shore, namely that of enlightenment. And Svaha means right now. So I thought, it's a good way to sum it up, that this reality, before we cook it up into preferences, can be expressed through practicing beyond self and other as the Bodhisattva vow. And of course, my teacher always talked about the Bodhisattva vow as a strange vow because, beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. That means that we vow to ferry all other beings across the shore before ourselves. And it's a strange vow because if you think about it, if we do that, eventually, if everyone takes that vow, everyone's just standing around saying you first, and nobody goes to nirvana. And he said that is nirvana, going beyond our own personal desire and saying, you first, is the point when we practice in that way. And his, svaha, bodhi svaha is something like, awakening, hallelujah, or awakening, right on, it's kind of an exclamation of joy, or, but I thought Fa Song was a great way to translate it as right now. So right now is the only reality that we can express. That is the only reality of Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. It's here and now, the bodhisattva. All right, so that's it. I've gone over some here. There was a lot to cover, and kind of went through it quickly, but that is the last lecture for me on this, and love to see if anybody had any comments or questions next.
I have a question, Shoryu. I think when you were talking about relying or taking refuge in prajna, it makes me think of like we can't rely on finding enlightenment or coming to enlightenment ourselves. There's that faith, like you said, that there's this that we put our faith in and refuge in prajna, because we can't, there's no attainment, there's nothing for us to attain. It's more of, like you said, a realization, or I don't know, like, because it's like trying to break it out into the self and other thing. You can't do that. It's all together. So maybe is the sutra trying to get you to realize and understand that it, again, there is no self and other, and then kind of a letting go of that idea. And I don't know. I can't like quite formulate everything I'm trying to say, but
yeah, I mean, I think there are just so many different. Oh, go ahead.
Well, then it kind of what I guess in the end, or when you were saying about how your teacher says, if there's bodhisattva thinking that they're wanting other people, or not wanting saving others, kind of thing, that's also creating the dualistic thinking, that there's themselves and then you first, because like in my mind it's like, if just the process that a person is going through, if we're all interconnected, is the same as the other, like, so that in now this is where I'm really getting weird, and I don't know. It's like if we're all doing this practice together, or if even just one person is doing it together, since it's all a part of the same thing, like like if one person has let's say we all have glasses of water or whatever, and I put red dye in mine, and we all dump them out into the ocean, it's all a part of the same thing, like my red dye is a part of the rest of the ocean too, and so we're all riding the same wave together. It doesn't you can't separate my practice out from someone else's, because we're all riding along together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one aspect of what's being said here, and there are kind of two things, I would say in response to what you're asking. And one is that the Dharma eye is what allows us to see individual beings, even though we know it's a mistake. We're willing to say that there is another because of the reality of suffering. So we can go ahead and say, well, there's no suffering and no delusion and no enlightenment. But then we actually see ourselves having difficulty, for example, having painful emotions, or we see others that are suffering and they don't even have the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sutras for teachings, for example. And so we're able to say, this isn't real, but I'm going to address it anyway. So it's beyond, that's the Dharma eye, it's beyond seeing and non-seeing. So it's seeing suffering with the eye of wisdom. And so that's the way that we're able to teach the end of suffering, by seeing, suffering and teaching that there is no suffering. Teaching that there is no attainment is a sort of attainment.
So when someone is like,
so
if someone, I'm sorry, just if someone is, if you observe someone suffering, it's not like you can just go up to them and be like, well, you're causing your own suffering, like you just need to stop that. Like you can't do that because like they're not, that's not going to help, so you allow for that struggle, and I mean, their life is their own life, and so the most we can do is just be there with them in that suffering and until they can kind of come to that understanding that, oh, I don't have to suffer. Like,
yeah, well, it's right. I mean, it's not very helpful just to say there is no suffering to anyone, I think, and then, say philosophically there's no suffering. So the point is really the practice itself of letting go, of suffering. So that's really what we preach and teach, and that's really what we do. So it's a very difficult, that's why these teachings are difficult, because there are two perspectives that are absolutely 100% reality. And one reality is that when we start looking at suffering, we see that it's conditioned and impermanent. And that is the definition of empty, or, not existing on some level. So we can always say to somebody, oh, well, you feel bad now, but tomorrow you're probably going to feel okay, but it doesn't really necessarily help, or it might. But the other perspective is, of course, is that 100% the entire world is suffering of an individual who suffers. That is their reality. And it's our reality when we don't practice, or so it seems that these two things are contradictory, but that's why Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, can't be expressed in words, because both of these things are true, so to speak, in a realm where truth or not truth, doesn't apply. But so we're willing to basically make a mistake, as I say, in order to address that suffering for ourselves or for others. But somehow knowing or understanding, or actually the understanding is letting it go. So we just need faith. It's not like we philosophically even have to know that it doesn't exist. Wisdom is practice. So we don't have to even tell somebody necessarily, or, it's letting go itself is wisdom. And for human beings, usually we have to have some reason to let go. We're stubborn. We believe in our minds is what it tells us. So we have to tell people something, or tell ourselves, why would I let go? That kind of thing. And let's see, there was another thing that you were saying too. The other part of your statement was yes, that's absolutely true, that, and Dogen Zenji says this explicitly in, Bendo Wa, like one person's Zazen has, more merit, or reverberates throughout the Dharma realm more than all the Buddhas of all past and future can comprehend, So one person's practice is the whole universe's practice. That's the other kind of universal perspective, is that since we are expressions of interconnection and impermanence, that the entire Indra's net practices when we practice. And that's why we can make our zazen in the morning an offering to all beings, and not just a way to feel better for the day, not just a way to do our thing or feel like, we're doing what we're supposed to do. So that's why I was kind of bringing up another way we can express it is it's an offering to Prajnaparamita, which is all things, the entire work. So we can, it's for them to have this kind of devotional approach. And some of us need more philosophical approach, but none of them, are it, of course. They're all just a little, pinch of, or a little drop in the ocean of reality when it comes to what we're really talking about in terms of Prajnaparamita. But we all need our way to faith. And Nagarjuna actually said, devotion is, he's seen as an ancestor in Pure Land Buddhism too, for example, which is really all about devotion, just chanting the name of Buddha and taking refuge. And it's all, Ujjayi Roshi called that opening the hand of thought. He called that, doing zazen with your mouth. So when you completely open your heart and mind to the here and now as Buddha, that's pretty much zazen, Yeah. You have something, Russ?
Yeah. This was a kind of went by fast, so I hope it's not a distraction. But I've always had some difficulty with that phrase when Buddhas, not difficulty in disagreement, but difficulty understanding. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they don't need to perceive they're Buddha. I can get myself all turned around with that phrase. Maybe because it doesn't, it's kind of foreign to our, current science-based understanding that we need accountability and evidence. So we judge things on whether we actually have some evidence that they're true. And, like the last 4 years have pointed out how important that is, that what you say be actually true, right? So if Buddhas don't need to, if Buddhas don't need to perceive that they're Buddhas, how do they know they're Buddhas? How do you know in your own practice? How do I know that whether I'm totally going off in the wrong direction because I don't need to perceive it, or whether, hey, this is cool, I'm already Buddha. So I'll leave it there because that sort of gives you a sense of my confusion about it.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, of course.
Yeah. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, we've got the latency issue on this connection here, so it takes a second for it to get over and back. But I think there's just so many things he's saying probably in that statement. Buddhas don't necessarily need to notice that they are Buddhas. And, I think for me, like one of the main things is that Buddhahood is not set up on this subject-object relationship of, perception, perceiving that I am a Buddha and you're not a Buddha, or that samsara, this is the shore of suffering and that is the shore of nirvana. And so Buddhas don't need to perceive because they just express Buddha. Perception, then this is a more kind of, absolute perspective, is that when we, a lot of times we want to think that we're Buddha just because we want to feel like good about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But as when we're living by vow, when we're practicing in vow, we're just expressing Buddha, and that gives us joy, you know. So, but the other part is, I think he's talking about our Zazen practice, because when we let go in Zazen, there's no knowing whether we're hitting the mark or not, because hitting the mark is a function of our delusive mind. You know, whether it is the mark or not the mark is part of our judging mind. So we let go of all of that in our Zazen practice, and that is kind of the foundation for everything we do outside of that, where we need to rely on Buddha, you know. So the other part of it is the relative aspect, where we have to try to nurture this body and mind and do better in the world, you know, do better according to our own practice, and make some kind of a judgment about, not a judgment, but some kind of measuring of what's happening in society or in our practice. So that's the compassion part. That's the relative, you know, the relative realm. And so I think, you know, for me, it comes back again to the Bodhisattva being willing to make this measurement, but knowing at any point it could be a mistake, and come back to the vow. So if we know that we're Buddha, we can't ever make a mistake. You know, if we know that we're doing the right thing, we don't ever have any way to, you know, come back to have some more information and adjust our perspective or our activity. So, you know, in that moment, we're just expressing Buddha. But in the next moment, we might not be expressing Buddha. Every moment we have to come back to expressing Buddha. So, and that's, you know, this is like what we call, you know, Uchamoroshi called vow of repentance. So we have a vow to bring our Zazen practice into our daily life. So we see something, you know, we have to pass, we say we're practicing with all beings, and we want to have an open and flexible mind. And that is Buddha. So we walk the Buddha path, and then, you know, we stray from it. So we, you know, we come back to expressing Buddha. So that's the vow. The vow is to walk as Buddha, keep walking as Buddha. And then we stray from that, and we come back to Buddha. So usually we know that's what part of our Zazen practice tells us, or we understand, you know, sometimes when we're giving something out of a gaining mind, if we're giving our practice in society as a way to make ourselves look like a Buddha, or look like a giving, politically aware person, or whatever it might be, through our practice, we've come to understand when we're doing that, you know, and come back to just giving. So we don't need to be a Buddha, you know, we just want to express Buddha. This is where the saying "just do it" comes from, I think. Just do it. And although Nike, you know, sold that in the 80s or whatever, I mean, I think it got practiced in, actually. But I think that's really what Dogen Zenji's teaching is that, you know, just do it without, you know, putting this extra layer of wanting to know that we're doing it right, because that's based in our gaining mind. And some people say, you know, there's no enlightenment in Soto Zen, Mike. And that's absolutely wrong. You know, that there's no awakening in Soto Zen doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because Dogen Zenji, you know, that was never the intention at all. But our understanding of what Buddha is, or what awakening is grounded in delusion usually. So, you know, we can't measure Buddha by the deluded mind. But so I think you're talking about here taking responsibility, and, you know, how do we take responsibility, and how do we make, you know, an effort to do better in our practice if we don't try to be a Buddha. Maybe is your question, right?
Thank you.
Well, actually, a couple of things. Since this is the last, I'll just say that Shoryu, this whole thing is super enlightening, and I had no idea how. I mean, I knew that the Heart Sutra was really important to the Mahayana tradition.
You're breaking up.
You know, I didn't know much about Nagarjuna, and I didn't know about how it's been throughout our tradition. So I really appreciate you taking the many years of studying to show us that. So, am I? Can you hear me? Oh, crap.
We heard most of that. I think we heard some of that. And you were breaking up a lot.
Oh, man. Might just be where.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, if you can make it through, I was just going to say that I appreciate that. And I really appreciated the Heart Sutra. I was going to talk about that too. But can you hear me any better? No?
Yeah, I think we heard you. So you were expressing appreciation for this, I think.
Yeah. I was going to say that I appreciate this, and and for the Heart Sutra.
Well,
so I had some questions, but if I'm breaking up, you know, I'll save it for later. But at least I could say that.
Yeah, you could type the question into the chat if you want. We actually don't have too much time left, but if you wanted to type it into the chat, we could do that. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Oidi. I really appreciate everybody coming to these meetings and practicing during this time. And I've really enjoyed it. and I hope to do more of this. And Russ was bringing up the fact that I need to be reminded that we were going to talk about where we might go from here. So I think that I'm probably going to give a break from giving talks for a bit, but I've got some really projects that I have to address that have been hanging over me for a while. But I'm thinking at some point in the future, I'll probably, give like a short talk on Saturdays, like just a brief, 15 or 20-minute talk. But I was thinking what we could do would be to continue the sitting, on Saturday mornings from like 9 to 11.
Or the days that she's during that part too.
Yeah, so on Saturdays, we can have some sort of practice day. So I was thinking, we could sit Zazen on regular days from 9 to 11. I'll put this on our website and post it on the Facebook page and stuff too. But like starting next week, we could just meet. Anyone who wants to can meet for a couple of periods of Zazen from 9 to 11 if you like, or one or two or of those. And that should, we'll just keep that ongoing. The only sketchy part is the connection out here and without sun. So there's a way that, it might be that you come sometime and we may not be able to get online until I get a better connection out here, which hopefully this year will happen. The other thing is that maybe, Lacey will be able to do it some days when I can't do it out here, when I can't host it out here because of the weather. And she is also planning to do the half-day sit during Sesshin. So the Saturdays when there's a Sesshin, she's planning to do the half-day sitting the way that she did last month. And so she'll send out an email about that too. And I'm hoping, at some point my plan was to give sort of another more like structured series of talks like this, or, discussion about another writing. But it may not be for a while, but as I say, I hope that relatively soon I can just start giving a sort of shorter talk on Saturdays after the sitting, just so it'll be a chance for folks to come together and sit, and then have a little talk, and then maybe discussion, a Dharma discussion. So. But I think that's all then for today, unless anybody else had anything else. Thank you once again, and happy spring.
Thank you, Shoryu.